So who are we? I'm Aaron van Wirdum. I'm technical editor at Bitcoin Magazine, and I'm joined by Samson Mow. He's Chief Strategy Officer at Blockstream, also the CEO of Pixelmatic, which is a gaming company. 1/4 of the happy crypto friends.
Magical crypto.
Magical crypto friends. Sorry about that.
We just released a new episode today.
I noticed, which is a popular YouTube show on the whole cryptocurrency space. And a hat vendor. Anyone who's sort of into Bitcoin will have recognized, will know about Samson's hats. I saw one of them yesterday, the Dragon's Den hat. Okay. I don't see any of them here right now. Blockstream, you're Chief Strategy Officer at Blockstream, which is a blockchain development company. It was founded by a group of Bitcoin core developers, as well as Adam Back, who is the inventor of Hashcash, which is in turn the basis of proof of work, which is used in Bitcoin and a lot of other cryptocurrencies. I mentioned Blockstream is a blockchain development company, but really Blockstream focuses on Bitcoin only. Is that correct? And if so, why Bitcoin? Why is this? Why don't you focus on any other blockchains? Why don't you create your own blockchain? Why Bitcoin?
So I think a large part of the reason why we focus on Bitcoin is because Bitcoin is the blockchain that really matters. There's been some repositioning of the dynamic, I guess, like saying blockchain is the real innovation behind Bitcoin and whatnot. But if you look at why you want a blockchain, there are three main properties that are really important, which is immutability, verifiability, and censorship resistance. And Bitcoin is the only chain that actually really has all these three and does them well.
Right, so let's tackle one of these real quick. So immutability, what do you mean by that exactly? What does it mean in the context of a blockchain, and why does Bitcoin offer that?
So immutability is just you can have some faith that you're confidence in your transactions not being overwritten in the past. That
right.
The state of the chain, the blockchain is the actual state of things.
Once a transaction happens, it has happened. There's no way of turning back. Even if your account was hacked or if it was an accident, it's done. You can ask for your money back if you ask nicely, but there's no way of reverting it. So why does Bitcoin offer this better than any other blockchain?
Probably because of the proof of work and the amount of hash rate that is on Bitcoin, that is mining Bitcoin. Yeah. It's gotten to the point where we're consuming like the equivalent power of a small country now. Right. Every day. And to attack the network, I think you need at least $2.5 billion of capital just to buy the ASICs to mine Bitcoin. And by the time you have bought those ASICs, not excluding data centers and labor and everything, the hash rate probably will have jumped again. Yeah, so and no other cryptocurrency, no other blockchain comes close to this, I think. Yes. All right, the second thing you mentioned, I think, was verifiability. Verifiability. Yes. So what is this? What does it mean? Why does Bitcoin offer it? So Bitcoin is publicly verifiable. You can run your own client, the Bitcoin Core client, and you can actually verify all of the transactions on the blockchain by yourself without having to rely on a third party. Right, and you think Bitcoin does this better than other blockchains or currencies? Well, it's a sliding scale, I think. So a lot of other blockchains or coins can also be verified because they are public, but then when you go into blockchain territory, then it's usually less thought out as part of the design. It could be a private network where everything is behind a firewall or behind a VPN. Yeah, Bitcoin has a very strong ethos that it should be kept such that people can actually verify their own transactions without having to trust on some external party or any company or whatsoever. First one, there was one more. What's the third one? Censorship resistance. Yes. So I think censorship resistance is the inability for anyone to censor your transactions. And that's largely achieved through the network being decentralized so that no one party's in control. You can't knock on someone's door and say, censor Aaron's transaction because I don't like him. Yeah, there's no company behind Bitcoin. There's no central point of failure in that sense. And that's also a strong ethos, and you think more than most other blockchains. Right. So that's a large part of why we at Blockstream are building on top of Bitcoin, because it makes the most sense. It's got all three attributes in spades, and we can do a lot of interesting things on top of the Bitcoin blockchain.
Right, okay, so that's sort of the case for Bitcoin. The talk is mostly about the future of Bitcoin. To get to the future, I'd like to very briefly tap into the past and the state of Bitcoin right now, what's happened over the past couple of years. The first time I think we spoke for more than 3 sentences is I interviewed you for Bitcoin Magazine a couple of years ago, 2015.
Feels like a long time ago.
It feels like ages ago. Yeah, 2015, and the scaling debate was starting out, and there was this idea to increase scale or scalability of Bitcoin by increasing the block size, which is a incompatible protocol change, and it was kind of controversial at the time, in part because it might harm some of these properties we just mentioned. And at the time you were the COO at BTC, and you were making the case that this hard fork should actually happen,
yes.
and the Bitcoin core developers should get their act together and get with the plan, and if they didn't, then maybe the companies in the space should just do it themselves. Now, fast forward 2 years later, you're distributing no 2x hats, which was sort of a opposition against this very idea you were pushing 2 years prior. So what happened in your thinking? What changed? What changed your heart there?
Well, I think it's a process of understanding. So at the surface level, when someone makes an argument saying Bitcoin is clogged up and it can't scale, we need to do something to fix it, it makes rational sense on the surface. But if you really dig down deep and try to understand what's actually happening and how the system actually works, then you come to realize that you should not be able to change something. If Bitcoin is supposed to be digital gold, then no one should be able to easily modify the properties of the system. And it also comes down to an understanding of how consensus systems work. If someone can just modify a consensus rule, like the block size is just one of many consensus rules. There are a lot of consensus rules that people have no idea exist. Like having run a mining pool, you'll know that there's 100 confirmations you have to reach before you can spend a Bitcoin from the Coinbase. But to understand all of that, it's counterintuitive. It runs counter to what you would think normally should be the case.
Yeah, you would think that for Bitcoin to thrive and to grow, it needs to adapt to the circumstances, it needs to improve, it needs to evolve. What you're saying is actually the value proposition is that it shouldn't. Is that what you're saying, or?
Yeah. So the protocol level should also have some level of immutability. If we can change things arbitrarily, then it kind of means Bitcoin is meaningless. Like if we can change the 21 million cap or change the inflation rate, then it's not much better than a fiat currency. The whole point of Bitcoin is that it's kind of acting like a digital gold, and nobody can just change the properties of gold at will.
Right. Now that does mean that, and we've seen this over the past year, for example, that there's been a lot of criticism on Bitcoin on how it's become this slow and expensive chain. You know, fees have gone up, confirmations time. Actually, it's not it's an either-or thing, right?
Yeah.
If you pay higher fees, then your transactions come through fast, or you have to wait longer. Is this a problem? Do you see this as a problem that needs to be solved?
I think it's an area that can be improved, but the critical thing to understand is that fees pay for the security of the network. So Bitcoin is secure because through the block subsidy, the block reward, we're paying a lot of money to the miners to secure the network. And every few years, we'll have a halving where that's reduced. Eventually, fees have to take over the block subsidy in some way, right? Either we reach hyper-Bitcoinization and Bitcoin price skyrockets, or fees go up over time. But it does serve a purpose in the design of the whole system. And again, it's counterintuitive. But if there are high fees, then nobody will use this thing. But if it's secure, people will still pay for fees. If it's censorship resistant, people will still pay for the fees to use this thing.
So, but does this mean we need to give up on Bitcoin as a day-to-day payment system?
No, I think that's not the case. And we're seeing with new tech, with Lightning, with sidechains like Liquid, which we're rolling out soon. I think we're 2/3 initialized now. We'll address a lot of these issues with the fees and with scaling in general, because you can have application-specific use cases for different layers. So for Liquid, as an example, it's inter-exchange settlement primarily. So the functionaries that secure the Liquid network are mostly exchanges. And if traders start using Liquid to move money between the different exchanges, that'll alleviate some pressure from the main chain.
Right. So to take a step back and explain, Liquid is a sidechain.
Yes.
So it's basically an alternative blockchain that exists between these exchanges and other companies, and you can move your Bitcoins to this blockchain, and then it's pegged, and you can move it back at any time you want, right?
Yes.
So that alleviates pressure from the main chain.
Yes.
And then Lightning has been a hot topic as well, and Blockstream is also contributing to Lightning development.
Yeah. So we're one of the 3 Lightning implementations. We have Christian Decker and Rusty working on C Lightning.
So, given this this upcoming technology, and what do you see? How do you see Bitcoin evolve over the next 1 to 5 years, or who's going to adopt Bitcoin, or how do you see this grow in the sort of short term?
So over the next 5 years, I think we'll start seeing some mass adoption, I believe, at retail level. Well, what's your thought?
You mean in regular coffee shops around the corner here?
Yeah.
So the interesting thing I think about Bitcoin is that it has this inverse adoption cycle. I kind of feel that where your financial system is working properly, Bitcoin is not very necessary yet. So it will be first adopted wherever either there's no financial system available at all, or where it's very crappy, and then that's sort of the adoption curve. So to buy a coffee around the corner, credit cards in here in the United States work pretty well, and in most of the West. So I think that's kind of the last stage of the adoption curve, if you ask me. It will sort of evolve through all of the other weird use cases first, like I mean, we've already seen the dark markets, of course, because they have no other option, so they adopt it first. Or yesterday there was this tweet went viral about how a hotel in Iran was taking deposits in Bitcoin because they have no credit card availability. So I think we'll see all of that stuff first, and then here in the West, that's actually the last step, if you ask me.
Okay. I think I'm more optimistic. I think with the advent of Lightning, it's highly likely that all mobile wallets will eventually be Lightning wallets, and all it takes is one payment processor to integrate Lightning and Bitcoin, and then we'll see a wave of adoption. But I think Bitcoin is evolving on the 3 scales of what makes money money, right? It's already a store of value. It is a medium of exchange, and well, Fireside Chat is so hot that they had to send fire trucks. So yeah, it's a store of value already. It's a medium of exchange, and it's also a unit of account at certain levels. So with Bitcoin, because it is so divisible, like you can spend Satoshi or 1/100th of a Satoshi actually in Lightning, but you can't do that with, say, gold or with dollars, right? But if you have a IoT powered by Lightning, then you can actually have Satoshis as the unit of account. So that's like a millionth of a Bitcoin. So I think it's going to move across 3 paths on the way to its evolution and adoption.
Right. So you think it's already a unit account on a level where it doesn't really matter because it's so small.
Yeah. So Lightning is really good for things like reducing spam. So you can have someone pay a small fraction of a Bitcoin. At that level, it doesn't really matter to most people, and you can just use it as anti-spam measure or anti-Sybil measure.
Yeah. So we've both been around for a while. I remember there was 2013, 2014-ish. I remember a time before blockchain. Yeah. Right. At one point, it was Bitcoin was there, and there were some altcoins, but it was the whole blockchain industry didn't exist yet, and it was born from the Bitcoin industry really. And I think this started with, for example, Andreas Antonopoulos, who started to explain how Bitcoin is just the first app, and then from that idea came initiatives to just start blockchains without Bitcoin, and over the years. it seems to me that the sort of Bitcoin and the blockchain industries are like it's not even the same industry anymore in many ways. Like different cultures. How do you see this evolve over the couple? First of all, do you agree? And how do you see this evolve? Will the blockchain industry move back to Bitcoin because of the superior properties you think Bitcoin has, or will the blockchain industry go its own way and have success in its own way, or how do you see this?
It's hard to predict, but I see a lot of the enterprise blockchain solutions and build your own blockchain projects kind of drop off, and it's not as popular anymore. And I think a lot of that has to do, like a lot of the reason why is just because Bitcoin was not as fashionable back in the day because of the association with dark markets and whatnot. So I think a lot of people would just say blockchain instead, and it kind of spawned this whole industry that kind of existed without understanding why you need a blockchain or why a blockchain is special. And I think as people come to that realization that Bitcoin is the innovation, not the blockchain, right? It's kind of like saying, you know, the real innovation is aerodynamics, not aviation. But aviation is actually the real innovation, right? You can make an airplane that looks really aerodynamic, but if it can't fly, if it doesn't have the properties, if a blockchain doesn't have the properties of Bitcoin, then it's kind of less meaningful in a way. But as people discover it and understand it, I think we'll see people going back to Bitcoin and building more things on top of Bitcoin.
Right. So would that be directly on Bitcoin, or do you think, for example, Blockstream itself was founded on this idea of sidechains original, like that was the reason the whole company was founded a couple of years ago, was this idea that Bitcoin was limited, I suppose, and or maybe you should explain this actually. You're the Blockstream guy, right?
Yeah.
So what are sidechains and what's the potential of this now? And do you still see this as a big potential for Bitcoin?
Right. So sidechains are just another blockchain, and it is pegged to a main chain, so to speak. For Liquid, it's a 1-to-1 ratio. So there are 21 million Bitcoin. There are 21 million in Liquid. And to access the Bitcoin in Liquid, you have to lock up a Bitcoin on the main chain. So in essence, it's 1-to-1, and you can do different things in the sidechain. So Liquid has faster block times, 1-minute block times, but you can do any sorts of different rule sets in the sidechain. You can do a lot more experimental stuff. You can release things ahead of time, right? It can essentially be a test network that you can try things out. So we have confidential transactions and confidential assets in Liquid, which someday might come to Bitcoin.
Which is a way to hide the amount of transactions to increase privacy, right?
Yeah, so CT is hiding the amounts, and CA is hiding the type of assets. So we can also issue assets in Liquid. But it's like a playground. You can do lots of different things in the sidechain, and you can maintain that 1-to-1 peg, so everything still has value in the sidechain.
Right. So my impression was actually that the sidechain, that within the technical community and maybe sort of Blockstream side of things, that the enthusiasm for sidechains has sort of disappeared because there are security issues potentially. What do you think? Is this still?
I think there's still a lot of R&D that needs to be done. Merge mine sidechains still have some attack vectors. Like a large miner can attack the chain. That's why for Liquid we went with federated signing. So all the different exchanges and financial companies inside Liquid, they're actually just signing blocks. We have our own proprietary hardware, and they're using that to sign blocks and extend the blockchain. But they're disincentivized to attack because they're essentially using the network, or their customers are using the network. So by attacking the network, they'd be attacking their customers.
Yeah, sure. So we briefly touched on the scaling debate over the past couple of years. What do you foresee? Do you foresee a next big debate for Bitcoin, or where this is going, or next controversy, or what's the next?
Hopefully not. Like the whole scaling debate was a large waste of time because it's based on a misunderstanding that we can or we should easily be able to change attributes of Bitcoin. And it's underscoring the whole debate, right? People are saying you should do something, like you, Aaron, should go and do something. Whereas you can't really do that. No one person can make a change or force a change through. And I think we, as a group or industry, we're educated on that with the culmination of the No2X fork, right? So you see like all these massive companies, all these miners are essentially saying, make this change. And the users of Bitcoin essentially said no, and there's nothing they could do. I mean, the media spin was a certain angle, but the reality is, all these people, all these miners said one thing, and it could not happen. So I think that's an education on how Bitcoin works. And I think that should make things better in the future. Having gone through this learning and education, people should understand that you cannot just arbitrarily change it. Now, will there never be anything else in the future? It's unlikely, because there are also incentives to cause problems, right? If you made your own blockchain and your value proposition is that you're a better Bitcoin, then it is an incentive to kind of stir up controversy and conflict, I think.
What about something like privacy? Or I think that that's a topic that, at least within the technical community, that's sort of a high priority for many, but maybe the business community doesn't really see that as something even desirable. Do you think that could be?
Yeah, I think privacy is probably going to be the next big battle, because some companies or miners maybe don't even want privacy, because they might be concerned that they won't be able to use some blockchain analytic tools to trace funds in the event of a law enforcement action, or just for auditing purposes, or they're fearing some government crackdown because it's now private. So in Japan, a lot of the privacy coins were delisted from exchanges because they're concerned that they can't trace that coin.
Right.
Yeah.
So is there a concern that something like that could happen to Bitcoin if it improves its privacy properties?
It's definitely possible, I think. I think some prominent people have said Bitcoin does not need privacy. But I think having censorship resistant, like if you want to be censorship resistant, you have to be fungible. And I think it goes hand in hand. So I think it's definitely something that's going to come up, and I think it may be a big debate or civil war.
What do you see as the biggest challenge for Bitcoin in the next couple of years?
I think it's largely education and teaching people about how it really works and why it's valuable. Because we can see with all the proliferation of altcoins and tokens that people don't really understand why Bitcoin is valuable, right? A lot of tokens are essentially, you could say like they're company stocks, right? A company's behind it. And even a lot of the blockchains or coins out there are essentially companies. There is one company that is maintaining and building this thing. And they're not really decentralized, they're not really independent.
So the challenge is education for explaining what what makes Bitcoin valuable, and that's what we went over at the start of this talk, right? So immutability, censorship resistance, verifiability.
I think the biggest problem that Bitcoin solves has been largely solved, which is giving the world sound money, and we already have it. So
with Bitcoin, you mean?
Yeah, with Bitcoin. So from now on, it's just educating and promoting adoption.
Moving back to Blockstream, I think there's several interesting projects going on there, lots of research and development. Maybe we can discuss some of these.
Sure.
For example, I think the potential of scriptless scripts, is that something, or bringing smart contracts to Bitcoin, or how do you see this potential? Because people really associate smart contracts with other platforms like Ethereum or maybe other blockchains than that. And but Bitcoin offers smart contracts in some way, or? Yeah.
So scriptless scripts from, I think Andrew Polstra has a big hand in that. And then there's Taproot. There's like a lot of new stuff coming down. And then Schnorr signatures, key and signature aggregation. That's all coming down the pipe in the future. And all these things will improve privacy, scalability, and flexibility. And I think with scriptless scripts, it actually will improve Lightning. because you can reblind at every hop, which improves your privacy as a user. But I think a lot of those things that we're working on will eventually make their way into Bitcoin, and I think going back to your point about smart contracts, we actually already have smart contracts in Bitcoin, but there's no marketing arm that's kind of trying to associate Bitcoin with smart contracts. But a multi-sig transaction is essentially a smart contract, right? But Ethereum's marketing has kind of made us think, Ethereum does smart contracts, but Ethereum actually doesn't do multi-sig, so they have to do a multi-sig with a JavaScript in a very complex contract, which is prone to errors.
And then your funds get stuck.
Yeah, and that's what we actually see. So Bitcoin actually does what it does really well, which is lets you make transactions that are immutable and censorship resistant, and you can do smart contracts like multi-sig. But doing everything in the blockchain, like computing in the blockchain, is not really a good path forward, because you can see with other projects that it results in high fees and bloat because you're stuffing everything into the blockchain. You could do a lot of that smart contracting with Bitcoin and just have the results of a computation be one of the inputs to the multisig, and then your funds are released, because that's the point of the contract in the end. Some asset or money is released based on some conditions.
Yeah, the analogy would be that instead of having everyone having the blockchain do the computation is really done between the parties that are relevant to the smart contract, and only if for some reason they disagree, there can be a mathematical proof on the blockchain of who's right, and that person will get the money. So the analogy would be like a judge, right? Like we have a contract between us, and most of the times we don't actually go to the judge because we work it out between us, because we know either of us can go to court and win, so we might as well not cheat. And that's sort of the analogy that smart contracts and Bitcoin kind of try to apply, I think. We're running out of time.
Yeah.
So thanks everyone for listening. Thanks Samson for being here.